Thank you, Ken, very much. I appreciate that very warm and very kind introduction. And let me say good evening to everybody here. I'll try that again. Some of you, I think, may have had too much wine back in the back. Good evening? Good evening. Okay, now that sounds like an Ocala welcome, as I understand it. So I really appreciate the opportunity to be here this evening, the opportunity to come back to IHMC. This is the second opportunity I've had to be a speaker at the Ken Ford's lecture series. Ken and his lovely wife Nancy hosted me down in Pensacola a couple years ago, where I had a chance not only to visit the organization, but to speak at the lecture series there. And I was really looking for an opportunity to get back. I didn't know I'd have an opportunity to come here to Ocala. This really, to be honest, is my first trip to Ocala. I'm very pleased and very impressed, and particularly impressed and pleased to have the opportunity to be back here at the Institute for Human and Machine Cognition. I can't tell you, all of you out there, some of whom perhaps are not as familiar with this organization as perhaps others are, what a wonderful, great, innovative organization you have here in Ocala, and of course down also in Pensacola. It was just fun to me even to spend a couple of hours this afternoon getting up to speed on some of the things that Ken and his great team are doing here. The cutting edge technology is probably even greater than cutting edge. It's sharper than that, if I could use that sort of metaphor. And it really is world class in every aspect. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some of that, but it was just very warm, very heartening for me as an engineer and who's been involved in engineering and science throughout my 35 and a half years in the United States Air Force, and in my subsequent time since retiring at the end of 2003, to hear and see and meet and talk to people who are involved in just some wonderful research is just really makes my heart very warm. And you'll understand a little bit about that as to why that's important to me as I talked during my lecture. What I plan to do is to, for those of you obviously who were not in Pensacola, just briefly talk about, or at least tell you what I discussed there 2 years ago, talk about the related topic today in today's environment, and how that relates to some of the things that I've been involved in the 2 years since that last presentation. Talk a little bit about what I think are some of the challenges for us here in the United States, all of us in the category of science and technology, engineering and math. Talk also about the good things. I just already touched on one of the good things, and that is IHMC, but I'll mention a couple of others, one of which I just learned about this evening that really make me feel very positive. And then I will wrap up by telling you a little bit about what I think we, all of us, you, me, all of us in this room, all of us who have a care for this wonderful country of ours, some of the things I personally think we can do a little bit better to try to help the United States in this particular area. My focus of my discussion down in Pensacola was science, technology, engineering, and math, and where the United States stands relative to competitor nations, nations around the world, a lot of whom we think of normally as the big countries, but it also includes some small countries. And in some respects, how much the United States now lags in that particular area of science, technology, engineering, and math, particularly in how it relates to young people, young kids, the future generation, people like Matt here, who I had a chance to talk to earlier this evening. That to me is a very important topic, and it was then. I will talk a little bit about that, as I mentioned, and it is even more so today when you listen to some of the statistics. I also started off my comment by sort of relating a true but humorous story that I probably repeat too much, according to my wife. Since this is a fresh audience, I will bore you and repeat some of it again. I won't tell the whole thing because I think Ken has heard this about 5 different times, if you will. It's sort of a story about my grandson, Justin, and it was related as to why I ended up retiring from the Air Force in 2003. And just very quickly, I won't capture the whole thing, and I'll tell you another short story that's probably even more relevant. My grandson was with my son, with his father, on Martin Luther King Day in Washington, D.C., which is D.C. area where they live. And I'm a native of Washington, D.C., as you may have seen from my bio. On Martin Luther King Day, my grandson took Justin down. He was 6 or 7 years old. Took him down to see some of the things, historical events and activities associated with celebrating Martin Luther King's legacy, if you will. And my son mentioned to my grandson, he said, your grandfather was here in 28th of August, 1963, Martin Luther King's Freedom March, and when he gave his famous "I Have a Dream" speech. And my grandson noted that. And what I didn't know was how much that meant to him, because he came home at the end of that day. I was up at Wright Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio, running that command that Ken mentioned to you. And he decided to call me on his own. And he called and he said, Grandpa, I was very surprised to hear that you were there during that historical event. And it was just so significant to know that you had a relative who was part of that day. And he said, Grandpa, we've been studying about Martin Luther King in school. We've also been studying about Ben Franklin. Were you there when Ben Franklin flew his kite? And that's when I found out that 6-year-olds don't necessarily know time very well, but either that or he was telling me that you're getting old, Grandpa. I did put in my retirement papers the next day from the Air Force. More relevant today, last year, his sister, my granddaughter, invited me, or her school invited me to come talk to her 5th grade science class for her whole school in Northern Virginia. And I was thrilled to do that because they wanted me to talk about space programs, and I've been involved in space programs throughout my career. I used to command the Air Force's space organization. I ran the Star Wars program, Missile Defense Program, as Ken mentioned. I'm involved with Ken, by the way, some of you know. He's the chairman of the NASA Advisory Council. I'm involved with him in that effort, and I've done some other studies involving space. So I was thrilled to do that, and I took some slides and some pictures of the Hubble Space Telescope pictures to show these 5th grade science kids, and went through. I thought it was a grand lecture, and they seemed to enjoy it. They seemed to have a fun time about it, and they seemed to be very, very attentive to everything that I talked about. These are 5th grade boys and girls, and I did have a question and answer session, much like we're going to do here tonight, after I finished. And the first question came from this little boy up front who I could tell was very, very studious. He said, that was very understandable. Now, can you tell me what the string theory has to do with the relativity of continuum in outer space? And then I realized that TV show, Are You Smarter Than a 5th Grader? Was not a joke. These kids were bright. And I will tell you honestly, I've talked to high school kids and college kids, and I had better questions from those 5th graders than I've had from those other groups of people. So that was a foot stomper. That's a test for all of you for later today. So your questions? Well, since my last visit to IHMC, I've been blessed to have the opportunity to stay actively involved in a bunch of different technology initiatives and technology activities. I mentioned that I serve on the NASA Advisory Council that Ken Ford chairs. I'm on the Exploration Committee that's responsible for helping the NASA administrator to deal with the challenges and opportunities associated with space exploration. Are we going to go back to the moon? Are we going to go to Mars? Et cetera, et cetera. I also was blessed to be asked to lead or participate in a couple of major space studies. In the summer or spring of 2009, the National Research Council, the presidents of the National Academy of Science and National Academy of Engineering asked me to lead a study to look at the subject of the rationale and goals for the United States civil space programs. That's everything but our military and intelligence space programs. And to answer the questions about what should we really be doing in civil space for the United States. And then subsequent to that, we finished that particular study in roughly May of 2009. And shortly after that, President Obama asked Norm Augustine, the former head of Lockheed Martin, Sally Ride, a couple of other astronauts, me and a few others, to be part of a special committee we call it the Augustine Committee, to look at the subject of human spaceflight. What should we be doing about human spaceflight? That was a very, very challenging and daunting task, particularly since the president only gave us 90 days to do that effort, the whole summer of 2009, which is a blur if you will, and no vacation for any of us, but we thought it was very, very significant to have the opportunity to provide comments to the President and comment to NASA about human spaceflight program and exploration. Ken also mentioned that I was named or asked last summer, to serve on the Defense Science Board. I'm the Vice Chairman of the Defense Science Board. That's the primary research advisory group to the Secretary of Defense in the Pentagon and to all the leadership in the Pentagon, dealing with science and technology and management areas. And then, as Ken mentioned, I was asked by the President, appointed by the President, presidential appointment to the President's Intelligence Advisory Board in the White House a little over a year ago, which is another very, very challenging, very, very important, very interesting activity. Unfortunately, because the topic is intelligence, I probably can't say too much about any of that tonight unless I shoot all of you afterwards. But and so hopefully I won't get asked a question about that, so we can avoid that particular thing. And then I really was blessed last month when the National Academy of Engineering elected me as a member of the National Academy of Engineering. So I've had a chance to be actively involved in a lot of technology things in our country. And what has all this reinforced for me? Well, it's reinforced for me the challenges we have in the country about science, technology, engineering, and math. When I talked in Pensacola 2 years ago, the focus of my discussion was a study, NRC study, National Research Council study, again led by Noam Augustine, called Rising Above the Gathering Storm. And what the premise of, and the major message of that study was how the United States is lagging almost everybody, when you look at it now, in the world, in the area of science, technology, engineering, and math development, science, technology, engineering, and math interest for our young people, science, technology, engineering, and math stimulus in our school systems. And I talked about that and talked about some of those statistics from that particular report. Well, lo and behold, when Ken asked me to come back and talk to this particular IHMC lecture series, it turns out there's been an update to that report. Noam Augustine and several members from the original Gathering Storm report, which was done in 2005, by the way, were asked to do an update by the National Research Council. So this one was just done and just completed late last year in 2010. The title, I think, is very, very ominous, if you will. The title is The Gathering Storm, Rising Above the Gathering Storm, rapidly approaching Category 5. The message there is things have gotten worse. They haven't gotten better at all. There's some updates in the report about what did take place as a result of the recommendations from the 2005 study, and updates on the facts that have changed in the world or in the United States relative to preeminence or lack of preeminence in the area of science, technology, engineering, and math. Let me just read a couple of factoids. Amongst the recommendations out of that 2005 report was a recommendation to the Congress, to the President, to universities, to institutions, et cetera, to establish research facilities, put money into putting emphasis on more research facilities, sort of like this one, if you will, around the country, to stimulate not only innovation, but to stimulate interest in science and technology, like the Tech Connect program that IHMC sponsors, particularly down in Pensacola. To look for other ways that we can stimulate students to enter STEM studies, get them interested in science and technology, engineering, and math, far more than they have been over the last several years. To create innovation centers in communities, to create environments like perhaps what can be done here at Ocala with IHMC as a center point, communities that evolve around and revolve around science, technology, engineering, and math efforts in partnership with universities like you have here in Ocala. To establish expertise areas of expertise in things like nanotechnology or biomedical technology and biomedical research or robotics, et cetera, and to bring those centers of expertise to bear on challenges here that we have in the United States. And then finally, to look at a focused way to create new jobs and new economies that are stimulated by these science and technology efforts. Those were some of the recommendations that came out of the 2005 report. Well, the report on that is that all of these things were actually done in response to that gathering storm recommendation. That's the good news. The bad news is they were done in Saudi Arabia, China, Russia, India, Luxembourg, and even friends like the United Kingdom and Canada. Almost none of those were done, certainly not as aggressively as those other countries, and some of them were not even addressed at all. So that gives you a hint of why the title of the new report, or the 2010 report, was rapidly approaching Category 5 as part of the gathering storm. Let me give you a couple other factoids. The United States today ranks 48th in quality of math and science education amongst major countries, both free world and some small countries in the world. 69% of public school children today are taught math by teachers who do not have a degree in math or don't even have a certificate in mathematics. 93% of kids are taught physical sciences by teachers without a degree or certificate in those particular studies. The United States ranks 27th amongst developed nations in college students who are getting degrees in science or engineering or mathematics. I'm reminded of some of you may have seen, you may be a fan of ABC News. You may have seen over the last couple of weeks, ABC News, Diane Sawyer's focus on Made in America and the shocking revelation to at least one family, but I think it probably represents all of us. I know it represents me, in looking at household things in their home, living room, kitchen, bedroom, and just for a chance, turning over or getting under and seeing where those products are made. And then they took the products out of that house that weren't made in America. Well, I don't need to tell you, those who did not see the show, the house was completely bare, except for in one place, I think one pot in the living room and a stove in the kitchen, only because it was too big to move. And so I'm reminded when I think of this other factoid, one of our great suppliers in this country, Walmart has 6,000 suppliers, sub-suppliers who provide inputs to them from around the world. 5,000 of those suppliers are in China. I don't know how many are from the United States, but I tell you, it certainly doesn't match that 5,000, that's for sure. And relevant to China, China has now replaced the United States as the world's #1 high technology exporter. And something Ken is also obviously very aware of, as I am, obviously, for anybody involved in our space activities, for the next 5 to 7 years, and I'm betting closer to 7, if not a little bit longer, starting this June after the last space shuttle flight, the only way the United States will get astronauts to the International Space Station is by purchasing rides on Russian rockets, the Russian Soyuz rocket. And as Ken knows, the Russians are charging, well, I wouldn't call it arm and a leg. It's more like arm and a leg and a body for any one of those rides, and the price keeps going up. So it's a challenging environment that we have today, and it hasn't gotten any better over the last few years. However, I've always been an optimist. I'm a glass half full type of guy, and there are some lights at the end of the tunnel, and they aren't necessarily a train coming toward us, but in some cases they might very well be. I think the awareness is increasing about the challenges and the problems we have in the area of science, technology, engineering, and math. And the awareness needs to start at the very top. Let me give you a quote. "Science is more important to our prosperity, our security, our health, our environment, indeed our quality of life than it has ever been in the last 20 or so years." That's a statement from President Obama. Another quote, "Where once nations measured their strength by the size of their armies, in the world of the future and the world of today, knowledge will be the thing that matters most." A quote by President Clinton. Somebody else mentioned this, so many great inventions in the past in the United States came from laboratories, our revered laboratories like IBM's laboratory or Bell Laboratories. Well, they are all disappearing. As a matter of fact, it's more than just disappearing. The computer part of IBM is now owned by China. Lyles, I think is the name of it. And a French company, Alcatel, now owns Bell Laboratories. So that's more than just disappearing. That's completely selling away, if you will, the family jewels. And even Jay Leno said once on one of his shows, if we're number one in technology, why do I have to call India for tech support? It's, again, sign of the times that we're dealing with. There are some real bright lights, though, besides awareness of the problems. And I've been blessed to have the opportunity to both be involved in some of them and to get a chance to see some of those. Every February, there is a big event. Ken talked a little bit about it relative to one of the things that I've been involved in, called the Black Engineer of the Year Conference, held in Baltimore, usually held in Baltimore. This year we did it in Washington, D.C. because it was the 25th anniversary. And it would blow your mind and just obviously make you feel very, very good to see the young men and women who are recognized during this forum, particularly on Saturday. Saturday morning, there's a breakfast from held by the deans of the schools of engineering of the historical black colleges in the United States. And Saturday night is a black tie affair where awards are given to men and women from universities, from institutions, organizations, companies, big and small, and government agencies, touting them for their excellence in science and technology, engineering, and math. It's a wonderful, wonderful, literally almost 3-hour event, just watching these young men and women come across the stage. And by the way, one of the things they do as part of this event is everybody that gets recognized gets a chance, supposedly for 30 seconds, sometimes it goes a little longer, to talk a little bit about their background and where they came from. And by and large, I'll say that 99% of those people, those kids, those young men and women come from very, very impoverished backgrounds where usually they're the first ones in their families to go to universities, yet they've excelled. There are more PhDs involved in that activity than I've seen anywhere in almost any environment. And what does it mean to companies? Well, Bob Stevens, the CEO of Lockheed Martin, Bill Swanson, the CEO of Raytheon, doing a mental blank here, the CEO of General Dynamics, Jay Johnson, the CEO of Northrop Grumman, the CEO of Boeing, this year the CEO of General Motors, IBM, are always at that event. I'm not talking about somebody representing them. They are there themselves because of the importance that they put in science and technology, engineering and math, and particularly where it comes to an opportunity to stimulate interest in that in the inner city and inner city schools. Bob Stevens, the Lockheed Martin CEO, has always been a big supporter of the program. He and I know each other very, very well. He told me a couple of years ago he would not dare miss that event because every year he comes away with literally 1,000 resumes of young kids from colleges who come to see the event, who are interested in science and technology, engineering, and math. It really is heartening. So that to me is it's one of those bright lights. Another bright light is something that I happened to have attended last night, a dinner, a gala fundraising dinner for a reading program in inner city schools called Everybody Wins. Everybody Wins is a national organization. I'm on the board of directors for the D.C. chapter, Everybody Wins D.C. And there you watch corporate leaders, lawyers from law firms, but more importantly, congressmen and senators come to that event with their young kids who they read with every week. And they show what's happened to those kids' lives as a result of having a mentor, a big brother, a big sister, somebody to talk to them and just help them to learn reading skills. I think somebody pointed out that Ken and I were talking about this earlier today. If you don't get a kid who can read by the 3rd grade level, they're never going to become the engineers, the scientists, the mathematicians, the technicians that we need for our country. So reading is fundamental. And at that program I sat next to last night, Senator Tom Harkin from Iowa. He's been involved in the program for 12 years. The Transportation Secretary, Ray LaHood, who, when he was in Congress, has been involved in the program for 14 years. Last year, I sat at the table with Vicki Kennedy, Ted Kennedy's widow. He read in the program for 25 years. And when he passed away, Vicki took over reading to his kids in school to make sure they don't miss a beat. That's another bright light, if you will, of the kind of things that are happening out there. And then finally, one other that I'll mention, performing arts. One of the stats I didn't talk about in factoids is that the United States graduates more college students in the performing arts than they do in any technical field, or even in the combined technical field of science, technology, engineering, and math. Now, I appreciate the arts like anybody else, but more importantly, by the way, if you hadn't got this, you probably figured out I'm flunking retirement. More importantly, I also serve on the foundation board. I'm the vice chairman of the foundation board for the Wolf Trap Performing Arts Center. It's one of the national park performing arts centers in Northern Virginia. And I specifically chair the education committee. And the reason I do is because they have figured out ways and now have sponsorship and a grant, $1 million grant from the National Science Foundation, because they are using arts to stimulate interest in science and technology, engineering, and math in young kids. And when I think about that, and I think about all the great art institutions, cultural institutions we have in every major city, and I'm sure there's some here in Ocala, and you have a university here, there's an opportunity there, another one of those bright lights, not just to focus on STEM alone, but focus on how you can use art, reading, anything to help stimulate an interest in science, technology, engineering, and math. And then I guess I'd be remiss if I didn't mention a bright light I heard about when I came here tonight. And I'm going to use this as a foot stop. I'm a retired four-star. What can you do to me but send me back to the Pentagon or something, or back to Washington? And I'm already there doing things. So I'm going to do this a foot stomp to local press. I've heard, this may not be true, so don't shoot me if I'm wrong. There is a school here, Forest High School, that just won a regional competition in robotics, in the first robotics competition. That is a big, big deal. And if that didn't make your paper and your news here locally like a basketball score, then shame on you, press, for not doing your part to help publicize those kind of things so kids know what's possible and the art of the possible and what the excellence is here in this particular community. So I did my foot stomp. I'm probably going to get shot here by the press here, but I'll get a lousy article tomorrow, so that's okay. It's an important topic. So, and Peggy Brookins, congratulations to you for leading that effort. Thank you. Well, I told you I was going to wrap up by talking about you. I talked about the problems and the challenges and gave you some facts. I talked a little bit with updates, if you will, on things that I consider to be bright lights out there that are helping us to address this particular area. As I mentioned, it's not just these programs. There are lots of them. I dare say I can probably talk to most of you out there who are involved in corporations. Certainly I can say this about Lockheed Martin. There are more STEM initiatives going on by different companies, different organizations around almost every community. It sort of reminds me of President H.W. Bush, the first George Bush, who talked about 1,000 points of light. Well, we have 1,000 points of light when it comes to STEM initiatives. The challenge to me, or the problem is, I'm a laser freak, if you will, in laser technology. You get more power when you focus light and bring some of those efforts together, as opposed to having a diffusion of different light beams, if you will, everywhere. So it's great to keep those things, those ongoing programs steady, if you will, but somehow we have to figure out a way, and I think our government and local governments need to be the stimulus for this, to bring some of these efforts together so you have a more powerful light and you can make a more cutting edge sort of solution. So I talked about things I was going to mention that you can do. First is continued awareness. Be aware of the problem. Spread the word about the problem. Make sure people understand what the challenges are. Write your congressional delegations. I don't care which side of the aisle you stand on relative to the fiscal challenges we have in our country today, the debt issues that we have today. There's no way that we cannot afford to continue funding innovation, funding research and development, because it is the future. It's the thing that's going to make our economy robust in the future. Demand synergies where you have an opportunity to, and bring programs together and partner programs that may have a chance to address these kind of things. Encourage young people that you know, whether it's school systems, whether it's Forest High School, whether it's others, to get involved in science, technology, engineering, and math. It doesn't say they have to be a scientist or a technician or an engineer or a mathematician, but they need to be STEM literate. the jobs of the future in this country and certainly elsewhere are going to require a knowledge and understanding of science and technology. And if you don't have that, you're going to be serving fries at McDonald's. There's nothing wrong with that, but that may not be where we want to be the centerpiece of our economy. And then look for innovative ways to get involved, whether it's using the arts or other things. Look for innovative ways to make sure that STEM is a focus. I guess finally, as you can tell by my comments, I guess what I'm asking you is to be passionate, be innovative as to how you try to help solve the problems, and be involved. Thank you all very much for listening, and I look forward to your questions. Okay, I guess I'm going to answer one question because it was addressed to me earlier, and even though it's not, I didn't talk about it per se, so let me just go ahead and address this. One of the other things, part of my flunking retirement, I was asked to do about a year ago by the Secretary of Defense, was to lead a special congressional mandated commission on the subject of military leadership diversity. It's called a Military Leadership Diversity Commission. Ostensibly, we're answering the question from Congress is why haven't more women and minorities achieved the rank of the top ranks in the military of 3 or 4 star? We were asked by Congress to address 16 major questions as part of their mandate to the Secretary to do this. I was asked to lead this effort by the Secretary of Defense. I was the only 4 star who was involved in it, and I had 31 different commissioners who had issued to me. And our report just came out about 10 days ago, and you can find it on our website, going to the Pentagon website if you want to see the whole report. But one of our 20 recommendations is now getting some press, and I wanted to at least set the record straight because I was asked a question about it earlier this evening. It was the one recommendation we made to the leadership of the Pentagon that the women in combat exclusion policy be done away with. And you had to read the whole report and read our recommendation to understand what we were saying. We're not talking about diminishing quality of who serves in different jobs, particularly combat jobs. We're not talking about putting somebody in a particular job just because of gender, if you will. We're not talking about a wholesale, let's go swap out all the troops we have in Iraq and Afghanistan and put women in those jobs. All we were saying is where a woman is qualified, where a woman is on the front lines, and they are on the front lines today, that woman should get the same credit for combat as any man. Today, that doesn't happen. We have women who are being killed. We have women who are being maimed, women who are being shot at every day in Afghanistan. They were in Iraq. And believe it or not, even though they're serving in those positions, when they come back in their records, they don't get credit for combat and combat arms because of that exclusion policy. So to me, it was a no-brainer to come up with a recommendation. Let's do away with that policy and make it an equal level playing field, if you will. Qualification is number 1. Ability to do the mission is number 2. But where you have something equal there, if a person is getting shot at, that person to me is in combat. So that's that one recommendation. I told somebody I would address that, and now I apologize. I'm addressing your question. Okay, I scared everybody away.
Your comment on the latest cancellation of the contract for the Air Force new jet engine that they wanted for their planes.
Okay, this is the engine, or as some people call it, the alternate fighter engine for the Joint Strike Fighter, or F-35. We currently have a Pratt & Whitney engine, very excellent engine. That's a part of that package that was developed by Lockheed Martin and Boeing and several others. It's a great, great engine. The question was whether or not we needed to have an alternate engine built by General Electric. And my thoughts are sort of two-pronged. One, I go back to the dark ages, if you will, relative to my career. So I was involved in the alternate engine we had when the F-16 was first developed. We had a Pratt & Whitney engine, and then we eventually brought on the General Electric engine, and they competed against each other every now and then to see which one we'd put in to different F-16 models or different F-15. And that sort of served its purpose for keeping costs down, et cetera, et cetera. In today's environment, we have to think about things a little bit differently. I am a big believer in technology, and so I'm hoping, and I mean this very sincerely, hoping there's a way we can still take advantage of the unique, and there's some very unique technologies that General Electric has that could apply not just to engines for fighters, but engines for commercial airliners, engines for other different jet engines for other applications. But I just didn't personally think that we could afford in today's economy and the budget we have for the Department of Defense to have two engines like we did back in the F-16 days. Big believer in what GE is doing, big believer in the technology, unique technology they have. To me, it was just the economics question, if you will, and I'm hoping there are other ways we can keep them stimulated to make sure we can take advantage of that technology for the future. Yes, sir.
Thank you. First of all, General, I'd like to say that I was in the Air Force when it became the Air Force, and
that was before my time. So
I read where
actually, I was 1 year old.
Where we were going to have a black general coming. I just want to see what a black general looked like. But
I hope I look just like everybody else, just a little better tan. That's all.
But my question is, you mentioned how far we've gotten behind in science and technology. I want you to explain why. Were we too involved in social problems here that we let people get ahead of us? Just why do we get so far behind?
Well, there are lots of, there's probably lots of good reasons, or excuse me, no, I shouldn't say good reasons, no good reasons. There are a lot of reasons that people will postulate for that situation. There are probably a lot of ideas that people have about why we got into that situation. I'll tell you my favorite one. I think it's a product of our culture here in the United States. I told somebody the other day, we seem to have some national attention deficit disease in the United States for everything. We have a great Apollo program that stimulated interest in science, technology, engineering, and math. After a few launches, they didn't even talk about it. They didn't televise it anymore. You never saw anything about it. Kids sort of forgot about it. And then what happened? God bless the souls of those astronauts. We had the Challenger accident. People got interested again, got more exciting. There's a big challenge, a big problem that needed to be addressed. And science and technology picked up again. Solved the Challenger problem, and I got to be part of that for the Air Force perspectives. And then we got complacent again. We lost interest in science, technology, engineering, and math. Columbia accident came along, another pickup. There's something about our culture in this country that it takes big things to excite us and big things to get us involved and energized. At least this is my perspective. And I don't know how you overcome that, but to me, the only way to do that is to, and I talked to NASA about this, we got to keep the science and math from a NASA perspective exciting. Keep it in front of people. Ken Ford and I both have talked about this, and we've said it, he said it particularly as the lead for our NASA Advisory Council. We said it to the last two NASA administrators. We're saying it to the current one. We got to make sure that NASA stays relevant and is out visible in front of young kids today. And part of that, as somebody was talking to me this afternoon, is using their media to appeal to them. I don't care whether you have to use some sort of Lego thing or iPads or use the internet. You can't do the things we used to do back in 1960 and keep things in front of young people because they're way beyond that. So to me, it's awareness. It's keeping awareness so that we can keep the energy level, excitement level up. Yes, over here. Excuse me.
You keep reiterating the importance of teaching us math and science and technology and keeping the youth involved in that. What jobs in the job market do you want us to focus on using those subjects to help our economy the most as the United States? Because we are trying to catch up.
Yeah, great question. Well, I was, as I mentioned at the very beginning, I was very heartened when I had a chance to come back here again and to see some of the just wonderful, wonderful technology in the area of cyber, in cybersecurity and computer challenges. Very heartened when I see the activities going on here in robotics. And this Forest High School is probably the epitome of how you can use robotics to solve a lot of different problems. I listened to Peggy describe what those kids had to do in their robotics competition, and literally in the few minutes she described it to me, I got dizzy thinking about not what just the kids had to do, the robots themselves had to do to be successful. Robotics, and you think of what kinds of things robots can do in so many different manufacturing environment, research environments. I think of nanotechnology, small particles that someday are going to be the heart and soul of almost every material that we have, and making them stronger and lighter. I think of biology. One of the things that I really enjoyed when I was the commander of Air Force Materiel Command, our big research organization for the United States Air Force, was every time I had a chance to sit down with the engineers and scientists of the Air Force Research Laboratory, one arm of my command. And one of the most cutting edge was biotechnology and biomimetics. Didn't probably say that right, but imitating nature and what nature has done that we're still trying to understand. I mean, little things that we don't think about that at least captured me as an old guy, an old engineer, if you will. The shell of a beetle, when you look at it, is harder and stronger and lighter than almost any material that we have that we use in today's cars, airplanes, you name it. If we can figure out how to mimic Mother Nature, we can just revolutionize material sciences, material technologies. The common, because I hate them, snakes. Snakes can sense even a fraction of a degree change in temperature in their environment from miles away. If we can figure out how to harness that sort of infrared sensing technology for our sensors, it's just revolutionary, the kind of things that we can do. And then I'll come back again to IHMC and the robotic activity that Dr. Ford and the people are doing here. Boy, it just blows my mind when I look at what they're doing for wounded warriors from the war. I look at what that means for paraplegics, what it does for handicapped people with brain injuries of all types, not just from the war. There's so many different types of jobs and things that just open up, if you will, when you get involved in those kind of technologies. Oh, I'm sorry, excuse me, go ahead.
Not too long ago, there was an article that compared a shortstop that batted .250, and he started off with $3 million, and a whole bunch of teams bid on him. And one of the top graduates of science, she had to go out digging for a job and had to drive a taxi cab for a while before she got a job. I think that's part of the problem. Would you comment? Because I think that's what you're alluding to, is our interest seems to be in entertainment and pleasure rather than going ahead. Am I accurate to what you're saying?
No, it's certainly one of the things I'm saying, and you're very, very accurate in that regard. I tell people, and I probably should have said it tonight, I didn't say it directly, but to me, the heroes in this country are our teachers in every aspect. I've given speeches relative not just to technology, but about teachers and the importance of teachers. I won't, in the interest of time, repeat some of the anecdotes along that line, but we don't value or show the value to teachers, and even for that matter, sometimes to parents, who are really the ones who are nurturing and bringing up and setting the values, but also the interest in learning for our young men and women. So I wish a teacher, any teacher, could get a fraction of a shortstop's salary or a basketball player's salary. Their lifetime, their career is relatively short, but still, it sort of shows what the value system is. So you hit it right on the head. Okay. I got permission to pick people out to ask questions, even if they don't have their hands up. So I'm coming over on this side next. There was one question. Back here, there was a couple of questions. Yes, sir. There are two. Light blue and then the stripe blue back.
We seem to have a problem, as was just pointed out, with our priorities. How do we change those, or who's working on it? I read the other day that we in the United States spend $4 on the elderly, Ed and I will appreciate that, and we only spend $1 on the education of youth. How do we reverse that?
You know, I wish I could give you a simple answer. I don't know. I think part of the answer is exactly the kind of things I talked about. It's making people aware of the disparities, but also what the opportunities are, and both where we stand today, where we used to be, and where we could be again, if we figure out some way to partially reverse that. You know, I wrote down a note last night, and unfortunately I can't, I either didn't bring it with me or forgot to bring it with me. It was a statement made by Secretary Arne Duncan at this Everybody Wins gala last night. And he was talking about different countries and their value system, if you will. And when you talk about sports, there's no difference there. Their athletes also, and movie and record stars also get lots and lots of money compared to teachers. But he gave a statement about how teachers are valued in Korea. And I wish I could give you the exact one, so I'll just paraphrase it. In Korea, just the term, the name they have for teachers is jewel of the future. That's not exactly correct, but it's telling what they think about teachers, how they value them, and how important they are. And sometimes you don't necessarily need money to tell people how important they are. You just need to make sure you understand the value that they provide and say that to them in some form. Question?
One of the things I think is part of the problem is our country's, whether we're talking about politicians or CEOs, emphasis on short-term results versus long-term planning and long-term results. And I'd like to see your comments in particular. I've recently become aware of how important it is for the education of the very young children, 0 to 5, or even 0 to 3. I'd like you to comment on how other countries educate their children of that age versus how we are doing the same.
Well, they certainly put a lot more emphasis on it, and they start earlier. Last night at this dinner, we also had the new mayor of Washington, D.C., Vincent Gray, talking about what he thinks about education and when we should start education. He made a couple of comments that I thought were very, very apropos and very, very important. He said that, you know, I think all of us particularly, but even today, young kids like young men like Matt, et cetera, we think of school as starting at sort of age 5. Well, there's no law that says that. There's no natural law. We have all these things we call preschools and et cetera. And he made the premise that we should just get rid of this pre and just start school and start educating kids as soon as we possibly can. He said, he started to say at 6 months, and then he also said he wishes there a way he could reach into the womb to educate them even before the womb. Right? That's a little far-fetched. Maybe Ken Ford and IHMC can figure out how to do that part, but certainly we have this arbitrary thing in the United States of when school starts. Kids in some other countries either start earlier, they go longer, and during the school year, if you will. This is just a different value system in education. We just need to change the whole value system. Let me just go over here real quick, then I'll come back here.
2 more questions. Over here.
Okay.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, and then take somebody over here in the black, and then.
Hi, I was reading your resume here, and it said that you had a master's degree in nuclear engineering. And I know the benefits of nuclear plants. They can cost the cost basis and also not having reliance on foreign fuels, where we send billions of dollars over to foreign countries that don't like us. My question is, with this new outbreak in Japan, is this a science that we should pursue going forward, or should there be other alternatives, or where you have some background in this, maybe you could shed some light on that subject?
Yeah, I've always been a big believer in nuclear engineering and nuclear technology and nuclear power. My master's degree at New Mexico State University was technically it was mechanical engineering, but they also had as part of the mechanical department, mechanical engineering department, a nuclear engineering curriculum, which is what I did both at undergrad school at Howard University and also what I did there. And my thesis is in nuclear engineering, nuclear power, if you will, for our space programs. One of the things I did when I was at Howard University in engineering school was to spend a summer as an intern at what would now be called Department of Energy, but it was the nuclear activity for the United States, and involved in reactor design activity for the whole summer. And I got an even better appreciation as a young engineer of how challenging the safety requirements are for nuclear reactors, but also how good they can be. I can't comment on the design in Japan, but I believe we have the proper safeguards, we have the proper designs for very, very safe nuclear reactors for power systems in the United States. Now, everybody's going to have to relook at that's okay, but what about if you're in an environment where you may have a natural disaster, like a 9-point earthquake, if you will, and tsunamis? Are our plants designed around them? Are they designed to stand up to that kind of thing? So I think we're going to learn from that, but I'm a big, big proponent in nuclear propulsion and nuclear power, but also alternative energy. I think we need to do a lot more in the area of alternative energy and developing shale oil fields, et cetera, we have in the United States. Let me go, I'm sorry, I said I was going to do the gentleman back there in the black shirt and then blue.
First of all, I want, as a 14-year-old teacher, I want to thank you for the words that you just said.
You're not going to be able to buy a BMW with my words, but hopefully you feel better.
I don't intend to, but it would be nice. But you mentioned before that a great number of students receive education in science and math by people without either a certificate or a degree in the area. And someone actually addressed this before. One of the problems is precisely the fact that as years go by, teachers are regarded with less and less respect in this nation. Our work is not appreciated. People are not stimulated to become teachers because of all these things that we see every day. Teaching conditions, salaries, respect, and appreciation for the profession are basically trampled by everyone, starting from some parents, not all parents, but some parents, all the way to governors and legislators in this country. They don't take in regard what we do, the sacrifices. They only notice that we get 2-month vacation, but they don't notice that out of those 2 months, we spend 1.5 preparing for the next school year. I feel that teachers are the only ones being held accountable lately for this, but where are parents in this equation? What solution do you see to this problem that not enough people are getting ready to teach such important subjects, and the fact that we're not therefore preparing future generations the right way?
Well, I certainly agree with you wholeheartedly. That's part of the problem and the challenge. And that's why I like programs like this Everybody Wins program that I talked about just a while ago. I think back on the banquet last night and others that I've been involved in and being on the board, I dare say that maybe certainly greater than 90% of the young men and women, girls and boys who are being involved in that program and who are being read to are from single-parent households. And in some cases, it took that program to get even the single parent involved in their education. So it just tells me we need more of those kind of mentoring programs. I know we can't do them wholesale everywhere, but where we can make a difference in even a few young kids will make a huge difference for our country in the future.
One more question.
Yes, ma'am. Here, we lost our mic. I can hear you, I'm sure, and I'll repeat the question.
Okay. Directing my question to the gentleman that was talking about education 0 to 5. One of the things that I've noticed as a parent of a 3-year-old is that a lot of the preschool education that is available today seems to be somewhat of a reaction to this fear that America is falling behind. And what my concern is that I see at a very young age an academic curriculum being imposed at the cost of cultivating imagination. My concern about this is that I know in Sweden, for example, they don't even start reading till age 8 because they recognize that one of the most important qualities to cultivate in an individual is imagination, that that's what makes a lifelong learner. Since America has been historically known for its innovation and its entrepreneurial leadership, I'm just wondering if we aren't sort of throwing the baby out with the bathwater a little bit. I just experienced a nursery school in California. My husband and I just moved here from California. And in this nursery school, it is completely dedicated to imaginative and creative play for these children, up to ages 5 and 6. And I'm now seeing that this type of curriculum, or lack of, because the kids really run the yard in this particular system, it's being endorsed by the likes of Oxford, Harvard, Stanford. And I'm actually in the precipice now of starting the same type of nursery school here in Ocala. So I was just curious if you could address if there's any of this sort of awareness on the radar in Washington, or if you have heard of any of this sort of...
Well, that's an excellent comment, and I think you're right. Perhaps the pendulum may have swung a little bit too far, if you will, towards trying to address our being behind, if you will, and there may be too much emphasis on some of the kind of things that you just described. In answering your specific question, I mentioned Wolf Trap Performing Arts Center. When I think back about it, now that you bring this comment up, they're using arts to stimulate interest in science and technology, engineering, and math. Really, all the programs I've sat in on that they do at different schools in Northern Virginia, it's really stimulating the imagination of the young kids. It's not forcing them to know math or technology or anything like that. It's stimulating their, an innovative way of stimulating their innovation, stimulating their imagination through art. And then there's almost sort of a natural segue, if you will, between that and interest in both better reading and in science and technology. And I guess in answering the question about anybody in Washington recognizing this, the very fact that the National Science Foundation gave a $1 million grant to Wolf Trap to try to not only develop that particular concept, but see how they can spread it, if you will, in other things that they are doing, tells me that at least one major agency is putting some emphasis on that. And I will tell you, since you sort of reminded me of that, every opportunity that I have, either with Wolf Trap or some other things I'm involved in, to use that reminder about stimulating imagination, I will do that. That's an excellent point. Thank you.
Let's thank
and good
our
luck to you
speaker.
in your school. Thank